So joining me now is the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Biden presidency. He was part of the Obama presidency. He was sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, but you were Vice President Biden's economic advisor during a period of time in the Obama presidency, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. And you were it's sort of like you've been in this world, but were you always more in Biden's world?
Yeah, more so. I mean, I was Biden's chief economist when he was vice president and basically moved over to that role when he was president. I started as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors, and then I became chair a couple of years in.
Did you do anything in the Clinton presidency?
Yes, I did. I worked in the Labor Department in the chief economist's office.
Okay. So you've been on this sort of this role of moving up the governmental ladders, if you will, for an economist.
I think if you made a list of Democrat economists in the DC area, I would be on it.
Yeah, right.
I'd be on it.
That's 100. You're very funny. And which economist are you? Are you on the one hand or are you on the other hand?
I am I try not to be that economist. I'll tell you what kind of economist I am in that sense. Most economists are problematic for politicians because they explain to them why they can't do what they want to do.
Right. A good economist can. Yeah.
The economist says, "Sir, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah. Ma'am, I understand but you can't do that for these reasons." So I'm not that kind of economist. I try to figure out, if not, the optimal, let's look at second, third, fourth best ways to get where we want to go.
So it's sort of like you've got a North Star. How can you maybe this isn't the best way to do it via economic policy, but you really want to do it? Well, here's the least damaging way to do it. Do you sometimes see your job as that?
Exactly. So, let's be concrete. You want to raise the minimum wage, right? So there is a level to which you could raise the minimum wage that would be hugely problematic. Mm-hmm. And there's a level to which you could raise it that would help low wage workers a lot more than it would hurt them. So let's go to the second level, not the first one.
That's totally makes sense. Well, let's just start with the near term, and then we're going to go. I was intrigued. I read your Substack. I'm a subscriber. I follow. Been reading what you've been writing lately, and it is this. You noted that it seems like the Trump White House is stumbling into the same problem you guys had in the Biden White House, where you want to focus on the positive data, but the feeling and perception of the economy is not what the data shows. And I guess, what would you be doing if you were in the Trump White House now asked to defend this economy?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be lying. And I actually think that's really kind of foundational. I mean, the way we used to talk about this when we were in the White House was we would say, correctly, we just got a great GDP report. We just got a great jobs report, 200,000 jobs, 3% growth. Mm-hmm. That would be part one. Part two would be, but we know you're still hurting and prices are too high. Part three would be, we're going to do everything we can to help on that. Maybe a three-part message is way too complicated. Maybe all people cared about was that part two, they're hurting, their prices are too high.
Right.
But we didn't tell them your prices aren't too high and that things are affordable and that affordability is a Democratic con job, which is what Trump said yesterday. So we tried to meet people where they were, I don't think particularly successfully. And I do think we talked past them, but we never gaslit them. And I would argue that that's what these folks are doing. They're making affordability a lot worse with all the tariffs. And of course, we weren't doing that.
So, one of my theories as to why you guys and why the former president struggled to talk about the economy and understand, and I'm curious what you think of this thesis, is that particularly Joe Biden, he spent a majority of his professional career in politics believing that for the American public, the barometer for a healthy economy was the unemployment rate.
Right.
And frankly, it had been 40 years since inflation had bitten us as a country, had bitten us as political leaders. Yes, he certainly was there at the early, in his first term in the U.S. Senate during inflation, during that horrible period of inflation. But that in some ways, and I hate to say that, but we're all human beings, you're creatures of habit, right? For the longest time, it is what the public saw as the unemployment rate. Is that fair to say that maybe there was just that Biden and maybe the wider world of Biden, and I'm curious if whether you thought you might have fallen into this trap, whether you were focused too much on the good news on unemployment and not fully appreciating the inflation situation?
Well, there's a lot in there, so let's unpack it. So first of all, on President Biden, I think you're spot on. I think he came up in terms of an economic world where if the job market is strong and you're at full employment, that is the most important thing you can do for working class people. Because if the job market is tight, they have bargaining power that they wouldn't otherwise have. And they can thereby, I mean, unions are obviously important to him too,
Sure.
but unions are a relatively small share of our workforce. If you get the unemployment rate down, below 4% and you hold it there, that's going to be fantastic for workers. And that was absolutely the world he came up in.
Right.
And I believe he thought that if we have the jobs, that if we have the tailwind of a strong job market behind us,
Right.
Economically, we should generally be pretty fine, and especially if growth is strong as well. Of course, we hadn't seen all that thinking evolved over a period when the average inflation rate was, between 1% and 2%. And so when the pandemic came and you had the collision of
Right.
of constrained supply chains and strong demand, partly juiced by fiscal policy, I will admit
Right.
that. That led to an inflation we hadn't seen in 40 years. And yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's kind of acceptable. I don't know, acceptable is the wrong word. I think it's intellectually understandable that, you might not be quite have a 40-year problem in your worldview relative to one that has been, really foundational, fundamental to your understanding through most of your career.
Take me through your back when you were in the administration about the inflation issue. I mean, we heard that phrase transitory a lot early on in the first part. And, as sort of my own armchair, economist, I always say I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an economist, but I've had to play one on TV for a long time, right? Or certainly I've got to be just smart enough about it to ask the right questions, I hope. And I understood what you guys were trying to communicate, which is, hey, look, this inflation issue isn't all just because we've handed out too much money. This inflation issue, we've kinked a hose, and all of a sudden we unkink the hose, and here comes the supplies, and it's just doing all sorts of haywire things, and it's like a bouncing ball. It's eventually going to stop being hugely bouncing, and eventually it's going to get there. But it was pretty stubborn, and it's still been pretty stubborn. And I guess I'm curious, everything you guys applied to it, did you think the inflation rate would be better than it is today? Better than it was even before tariff liberation day? I mean, I totally accept the premise that once he put tariffs into the economy, we no longer can talk about the Biden economy. It is his economy.
Yep.
But pre-tariff, that inflation rate was still stubbornly high. How long did you assume, discounting the tariff situation, that we were going to have this stubborn high inflation rate? Because I think about the 70s, Jared, and it's like, man, tariffs destroyed 3 presidencies, I could argue, right? Nixon is, he survives Watergate if it's a better economy. Ford wins if it's a better economy. Carter wins re-election if it's a better economy. And,
you mean inflation? You said tariffs,
yeah,
but I think you mean
no,
inflation.
I meant inflation. Yeah, inflation. What I'm trying to get at is, sort of I don't want to. I know the minute he put all these tariffs on there, it sort of could screw with forecasting. But pre-April 1st there of this year, it was still stubbornly high. How long do you think it's going to take to get that inflation rate down? And again, this is assuming we had a normal tariff policy.
Without tariff policy, I think inflation by the end of this year, which we're now at the end of this year, would, instead of being, I think the last seen, the core inflationary measures that the Fed looks at were closer to three than to two.
Hmm.
I think they'd be a lot closer to two than to three. I think you'd be looking at inflation. I think the core was last seen at 2.7. I think it would
Okay.
be around 2.2.
So you
2.2
think
is
this is
close.
a half percentage point that the
Yes,
tariffs have added
I
to the
do. I've
inflation?
seen zero point 0.7. I've seen zero point
Yeah.
0.5. I think zero point 0.5 is a good conservative estimate. So frankly, I actually think that inflation was behaving in a way that made sense to me starting in 2023. It was coming down. I mean, just if you look at the graphic of year over year inflation, it goes
Hmm.
up a mountain, and that
Right.
was a traumatic mountain for us. Let me tell you, I vividly remember the night.
Yeah.
We get the data a day before it comes out. I remember the night when we got the inflation report. It was June of 22, and it was 9%. And we lost our what.
Yeah.
But the other side of the mountain, it came down just as quickly.
Right.
And really, what you said earlier is completely accurate, which is that it was the collision of a supply shortfall and very strong demand, particularly for manufactured goods. I mean,
Right.
we were tracing numbers that showed that the consumer spending share of manufacturing was higher than it had ever been. And of course, people weren't interacting with services. They couldn't. So they
Hmm.
wanted to build out the new home
Right.
office and get exercise equipment. At the same time, all that stuff was jammed. And at the same time, they had both excess savings, so they were flush, and a
Right.
lot of fiscal support, so they were flush. So by 2022, I would argue that I had a very good understanding of where inflation was. I thought it was transitory in the sense of long transitory.
Sure.
It wasn't going to come down as quickly as we wanted it to, but I knew it was going to come down. And one reason for that, which is very distinctly different than the 1970s, is that this mysterious calculation called inflation expectations were well anchored. In the 1970s, key setters of prices and wages didn't believe inflation was going to go back down, whereas in the COVID inflation they did. Everybody saw that this was a shock. The
Right.
Fed was still in charge. Inflation expectations were still well anchored. So I knew we'd get back down to target, or at least I thought we would before the tariffs came on.
Do you hate hangovers? Well, say goodbye to hangovers. Out of Office gives you the social buzz without the next day regret. Their best selling out of office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe. From a gentle 1.5 milligram micro dose to their newest 15 milligram gummy for a more elevated experience. Their THC beverages and gummies are a modern, mindful alternative to a glass of wine or a cocktail. And I'll tell you this, I've given up booze. I don't like the hangovers. I prefer the gummy experience. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. Soul specializes in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products, all designed to boost your mood and simply help you unwind. And if you struggle to switch off at night, Soul has a variety of products specifically designed to help you get a better night's rest, including their top-selling Sleepy Gummies. It's a fan favorite for deep, restorative sleep. So bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering my audience 30% off your entire order. So go to getsoul.com, use the promo code ToddCast. Don't forget that code. That's getsoul.com, promo code ToddCast for 30% off. Well, that brings me to now, and it's in this decision of the Fed. And you actually framed it pretty well in one of your Substacks, which is, the Fed has a dual mandate and it's in contradiction, right? We have a stubborn inflation rate, but we now have a weakening jobs market. What should be the focus of the Fed?
Well, when I wrote that piece about 4 days ago, I said, I think it's 52-48 inflation. That is the Fed. I argued very close call, but that at their meeting in December 9th and 10th, I'm a little more worried about how sticky and high inflation is, in no small part because I'm looking at services inflation, which is sticky and high, about a
Mhm.
point above where you'd like it to be. And that's not really directly connected to the tariffs. Um, And, a number of people are like, well, aren't you worried about the job market and the fact that the unemployment rate has climbed? It's a point above where it was in April of 23. It's 4.4%. It was 3.4% in April of 23. People say, well, 4.4 isn't that high. Well, it's pretty high if it used to be 3.4. So,
Sure.
you know, this morning we learned that the ADP, the payroll processing
Yep. The
folks
private
that put
payroll
out,
people.
that according to them, payroll employment had a negative handle in November. It fell by
Yeah.
40,000. So now I'm really at a coin flip. But I think probably I'd want to sit at that table and hear what people said. I think I probably am a little more worried about sticky inflation than the average person right now.
Um, it's interesting because I mean, what is your understanding of why we have a job market that is potentially going negative? I mean, what it appears to me is you have a lot of big companies who are trying to figure out what kind of efficiencies AI is going to bring. And right now, they're not filling heads. They're not cutting
Exactly.
jobs, but they're not filling heads until they figure out how many heads can they avoid having to fill. How good is this AI transition? Am I
Right.
am I am I sort of
No, you're
summarizing?
you're you're again, I think you're spot on, and I'm going to tell you something that I think is really worrisome that I haven't had enough of a chance to talk about. So I'll get into that in a second, which is related to what you just said. Look, this job market is often described as low hire, low fire. Which is what you just said. We have a very low hiring rate. It's very difficult for people coming into the job market to get work. We're seeing unemployment
I got a
durations are,
graduating senior in college. Trust me.
oh
She's
man,
already stressed. She's got keep telling her you got another 6 months, relax, but she's pretty
yeah.
stressed out. Yeah.
Yeah, you should tell her that the unemployment rate for college graduates is still a lot lower than
Hmm.
for non-college graduates. Although for the newly minted ones, it is too high for
Hmm.
exactly the reasons we're saying. We haven't seen big layoffs yet, and you can't have a recession without layoffs. So I think that the uncertainty around both the tariffs, the impact of AI, and also deportations are all one
Yeah.
reason we're stuck in a low hire, low fire labor market. It is the case that when you have fewer people coming into the job market because of diminished immigration, you actually don't need as many jobs to keep the unemployment rate from going up. That's called the break-even rate. And when I
Hmm.
was in the White House, the break-even rate was, 150,000. Now it's half of that because the immigration impacts and aging boomers
Hmm.
are reducing labor supply. But we still have labor demand weaker than labor supply, and that's why unemployment has been going up. Now, on the AI point, here's the thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Because of exactly what you just said, employers are trying to figure out how many people they can reduce,
Yep.
what kind of their head count they can reduce because of the work that AI can do, which they're confused about, and they haven't really been able to figure it out. The worst thing that could happen right now would be a recession with a lot
Mm.
of layoffs. And the reason is that when we've seen, this is an historical observation, when we've seen technology displacing workers, technology is at its most disemploying when you're in a downturn because employers lay off a big chunk of their workforce,
Hmm.
and the question becomes, how few can I hire back?
Right.
Right now, they're stuck with what they've got, and they don't want to lay a bunch of people off because they just don't know where it's going. But man, if the demand falls out from this
Yeah.
situation, and they're in a situation where they lay off 25% of their workforce, they're going to
Mm.
be thinking, I might just be able to bring back 5%, just a few of those workers and get ahead.
Look, I'm pretty convinced that 2028. I don't think it's going to be. I think we're going to see it percolate in 2026, but I think 2028 as a campaign conversation, as a narrative, as sort of what voters fear of AI displacement is going to be a demand on candidates to have a plan. Look, we can debate whether this is going to happen in the next 3 years or we're still 10 years away from this. And
Yeah.
I devour every bit of forecasting data I can find on this. And, you have these different AI, sort of doom, the doom and gloom folks, AIs, I'm pro human race, meaning I think we are not going to allow ourselves to be replaced by robots. Like we're going to, we're a pretty impressive species. We survive a lot. We're not going to let robots displace us. But the fear of this, I think, is going. So, look, you probably already are talking to potential presidential candidates, people wanting to just get your advice of, what's a feasible way. I mean, what did we do wrong during the transition to all these free trade agreements
Yeah.
in the late 80s and early 90s? And all of them included promises of money for job retraining and all of this. It didn't really work.
I can answer this question for you. It's a great question.
Is that where AI is I mean, I assume, I've already heard Mark Kelly went out there and said recently, I guess we ought to have a fund where these AI companies ought to, be taxed. Maybe you tax the data centers, and there's a special tax of the data centers that just goes to job displacement issues. But what does this policy look like? What do you think's feasible here?
So I have an answer to this
comfortable?
question.
Yeah.
I have an answer to this question. First of all, let me say the following, which you would know better than me, but I'll bet I'm right about this. If you talk to the average economists, I spend 2 months of the year now at Stanford. So if you're in Silicon Valley, if you talk to a lot of people in the Beltway about AI, they're a lot more excited than the average voter is. So that's one assertion.
Jared, it's remarkable. I find it remarkable. We as a country, we are the most negative about AI collectively than other first world countries. I've watched this. It's fascinating how negative we are about it.
So
I think it's because social media destroyed us. And I think people fear the same geniuses that brought us social media are being allowed to run amok on AI. Good luck.
Yeah. By the way, you're speaking to someone who just finished watching the Netflix show Adolescence last night. So
I haven't done that one. Okay.
Oh my God, talk about social media and its distortions. But I'm with you. So we are on, we are shoulder to shoulder on this. And one of the things I tell people is, members who are thinking of working on the, trying to figure out how to run on this, is precisely that don't think everybody out there thinks AI is as cool as you do. They're threatened by it. And you just mentioned two things. You mentioned the lack of preparation for people who were hurt by expanded globalization. In the 90s, when China, and the 2000s, when China, at Bill Clinton's behest, China joins the WTO and we get our butts kicked, and no one was ready for that. And then the ignoring of the impact of social media, two incredibly portentous, existential examples of politicians failing to create guardrails to protect people from a massive shock. And so, woe betide us if we make that mistake again. Now, I think
Jared, we already have. I'm sorry. I look at it, this hands off, we were.
Well, wait a second, Chuck.
Can you imagine if we had outsourced the Manhattan Project?
Yeah, but you
that's
said
crazy.
You said yourself a minute ago correctly that we do not yet know the extent to which AI is going to displace people in the workforce. Right. What you do in that situation is you hope for the best and you plan for the worst. Now, what we didn't do in the globalization era, when globalization was taking off, we hoped for the best and we didn't plan for the worst. And in fact, we did the thing that economists always do. Here's a curse word that economists use all the time: transition. There'll be a transition.
Transition's doing a lot of work there. Transition means some people are going to lose their entire livelihood, but it's a transition.
There'll be a transitionary period, but we'll be fine. So when you hear an economist blasé talk about transition, run for the hills. So what we need here here's the policy that I'm trying to get people interested in. It may sound a little radical, but I don't think it is. A jobs guarantee, a federal jobs guarantee. If you are displaced, from your job because of AI, there's actually a lot of stuff that needs to get done in this country, and
Hmm.
AI can't do a lot of it. There's building infrastructure, there's human care, there's helping in the healthcare sector. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. Many of these sectors are underfunded, in part because so much is going into AI and data centers.
Right.
We need to have a job guarantee program wherein if you're displaced to AI, we can quickly get you back and up and running with remunerative, dignity-inducing employment. So it's easier said than done, but we've had programs like that in the past. We've just never really implemented them.
I was just gonna. Well, I mean, that was the New Deal. No.
Exactly. That
Right.
that was the New Deal, and that actually worked out well. Now we tried something in the 80s called CETA. That was a much scaled back version of that. And
Hmm.
if you go to the center, I'm also a policy fellow at the Center for American Progress. Numerous years ago, they were talking about a jobs guarantee and have documents about how to do it. So it's not something no one's ever thought about before, and I'd like to dust that policy off and get people thinking about it.
Would you do a jobs guarantee before you would do universal basic income?
Yes, I think universal basic income pales beside a job guarantee because people don't
Hmm.
just want income. They want to be productive. They want to work. They
Hmm.
want to contribute.
They want community. I mean, in some ways, work is another community, and I think one of the things we
Agreed.
consistently and constantly crave is community. Um, I want to tackle something else that you spent
By
a
the way,
lot of.
just as an aside, I think we're
Yeah,
getting way too much of our community online.
of course.
Yeah,
Well, it gets at something. It's funny to go back to the social media metaphor that I was using about AI. You know, we don't agree collectively on a lot of things in America these days, but there is one issue that is united left and right. It hasn't mattered if it was a very red state legislature or a very blue state legislature. They have all instituted the cell phone ban in schools in some form or another, right? And the libertarians have been convinced, right? The those that are worried about single moms and single parents having access to everybody's realizing, hey, this has been terrible, and we don't often. So that tells me something here that
yeah,
in some ways the public is wiser about this, and they usually are. I always say the electorate, the voters, voters are telling you something. Listen to them. Just because you don't like the outcome, they're telling you something. Listen to what they're saying.
of course.
So it is, and it makes me think that actually getting tough on tech and putting guardrails on I think is going to be a necessity for any successful candidate for office in 28. And I don't think and I don't think this is something that's just a D side thing or an R side thing. I think the fact that you have this collective concern about what phones and social media has done to our kids means we realize these technological changes have huge impacts on our lives. And I don't think we fully, we as you said, we in this case, we're so excited about what's happening that we're, and I guess this is exactly what life was like in the 19 teens and the 1920s.
Yeah, I think all of that's correct. I mean, I think there's another side of the issue that you have to think about if you're advising politicians or you're thinking about 26 or 28, which is that if you talk to the companies themselves, even if you're saying, hey, and you mentioned Mark Kelly before, I'm in Virginia. At this point, 39% of the energy in Virginia that's being produced, the electricity is being used by data centers.
Oh, and
Um,
don't think that they're not going to get demonized
yeah,
big
so
time
exactly.
on cost issues. Yeah, on the
So,
affordability.
the thing is, you go to the AI companies, you go to the data centers, and you tell them you're going to have to pare back, you're going to have guardrails, you're going to have to compensate the innocent bystanders whose electricity bills are getting whacked by you. And some of them are going to say to you, fine, I'll go to Saudi Arabia. And that's the political challenge that I was dealing with in the White House. We were thinking about these issues, and these companies were threatening us with exits. Frankly, I'll take that threat because of what you're describing is so important to put those guardrails in place.
Having good life insurance is incredibly important. I know from personal experience. I was 16 when my father passed away. We didn't have any money. He didn't leave us in the best shape. My mother, single mother now, widow, myself, 16, trying to figure out how am I going to pay for college. And lo and behold, my dad had one life insurance policy that we found. It wasn't a lot, but it was important at the time. And it's why I was able to go to college. Little did he know how important that would be in that moment. Well, guess what? That's why I am here to tell you about Ethos Life. They can provide you with peace of mind knowing your family is protected, even if the worst comes to pass. Ethos is an online platform that makes getting life insurance fast and easy, all designed to protect your family's future in minutes, not months. There's no complicated process, and it's 100% online. There's no medical exam required. You just answer a few health questions online. You can get a quote in as little as 10 minutes, and you can get same-day coverage without ever leaving your home. You can get up to $3 million in coverage, and some policies start as low as $2 a day. That would be billed monthly. As of March 2025, Business Insider named Ethos the #1 no medical exam instant life insurance provider. So protect your family with life insurance from Ethos. Get your free quote at ethos.com/Chuck. So again, that's ethos.com/Chuck. Application times may vary, and the rates themselves may vary as well. But trust me, life insurance is something you should really think about, especially if you've got a growing family. Well, let's see. I mean, I keep thinking there is a left-right coalition here that does want to put some guardrails on tech, right? When you get people like Lena Khan and Steve Bannon, both concerned about this concentration of power, but it hasn't translated. I mean, this is just such a feckless Congress, and frankly, it hasn't mattered. The last 10 years, Congress has been hesitant to get into the regulatory.
Well,
They'll do oversight, but they won't do the regulatory changes.
I mean, crypto is a good analogy. I mean, I think crypto is largely an accident going out to happen in terms of systemic risk to the economy. But what did the crypto bros do? They lobbied up faster than any industry I've ever seen. So, these data centers are they're the Mag 7. I just looked this up. The market capitalization of the Mag 7 is $22 trillion.
Yeah.
So, they have all the resources they need to purchase all the deregulation they want.
If you strip out the Magnificent Seven, is the rest of our is the rest of the publicly traded companies? I mean, I've seen some analysis that say, you know what, no companies aren't doing that well.
So
but the big seven is propping everything up.
So I've got it's funny you should ask that, because I recently backed out a number that I thought was really compelling answer to that question, unless it's too obscure. So I'll test it on you and see if it works. This is a few days old, but I'm sure it doesn't matter. If you look at the year-over-year increase in the S&P 500, it's 11%. If you then that's weighted, meaning that you weight it by market capitalization. So that's how the S&P is measured every day.
So
that's
the biggest cap companies. I mean, I have this thesis that the reason we've seen crypto prices plummet is that the crypto folks realize that this is probably not a real asset. They hurry up and sell it and then buy the Magnificent Seven.
Right. So the Magnificent Seven get a huge weight. I mean, they're not all public. Like AI is obviously still a private company. But all I'm saying is that 11% increase in the S&P is a weighted measure, weighted by market capitalization. You can also look at an unweighted measure of the S&P. That's up 0.8% over the last year. 11% weighted, 0.8 unweighted. We have an S&P 7 and an S&P 493. And the S&P 493 is pretty flat.
Well, that tells you it's flat or actually negative.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's flat. I mean, I've actually looked at the 493 or whatever it is, because again, not every one of the seven is public. But yeah, it's flat. It's pretty flat.
Let me get into a couple other issues that one that you wrote about in talks about healthcare. And look, this is such the weirdest issue, because it's not a private sector. It's not a private enterprise. It's a huge part of the economy, but it's super regulated, but at the same time, it's this sort of public-private, and it's a mess, right? And
Public-private mess.
I look at. I'll just take my little observation, which actually is going to be through the prism of college football, but the University of Miami is able to spend a lot more money on football now because they're making so much money, and they're not alone. This is a lot of universities. A lot of universities are funding some of their high-priced outlays, whether it's sports, building new buildings, et cetera, because they have health systems that are nonprofits, Jared, who are making money hand over fist. Because it's a nonprofit, you got to immediately take whatever profits you make and put it back into the institution. In this case, it's been university athletics, the Longhorns, USC, Miami. There's quite a few that have done this. But what it tells me is, if we have a system in our healthcare system, and if I just take hospitals, where there's more money to be made being a nonprofit hospital system than it is to be a for-profit hospital system, what are we doing here? Like, something seems off. This is a jerry-rigged economy. This isn't a real free market.
Exactly right. I mean, the way I always say it, I mean, your analogy is really interesting. It's fairly complex. Here's a simple way to say, I think, a similar thing. If I show up to the supermarket hungry, they don't have to feed me. If I show up to the hospital sick, they have to treat me.
Mm-hmm.
That takes it out of the market right away. Right. And every single other advanced economy has figured it out. That trying to make this a for-profit or a kind of weirdly structured nonprofit sector of the type you just described is going to mean an economy that spends 18% of its GDP on healthcare. That's us. Versus 10 or 11%, which is the average for every other advanced economy. And you might say, well, surely they have worse outcomes than we do, given that they're spending 8%, 9% of GDP less. They do not. They have as good, if not better, outcomes than we do. What they don't have is, 5 miles from where I live, massive houses on the Potomac that are owned by lobbyists for big pharma. So by dint of making this an inelastically demanded good, if you need healthcare, you need it. It's not shoppable. You can't get in the hospital. You can't go in the ambulance and say, "Wait a second, I'm going to call a cheaper ambulance." It's not shoppable. It's inelastically demanded, and the prices are completely non-transparent. You never really know what you're paying for anything, and expect people not to have their hands in the healthcare cookie jar, which of course they do. So there is a ton of work to be done there. I myself, along with Neil Mahoney, just wrote a piece on how to make ideas that would make healthcare a lot more affordable. They're out there. We've seen other countries do them. We should do them too.
Because look, I have empathy for those members of Congress who are going, why are we subsidizing insurance companies, right? So I have empathy for that. At the same time, look, we don't want to. We don't have time to transition, and these folks need affordable health care. So it's one of those where you're like, boy, what are we doing? Why don't we reform the insurance industry? Why don't we reform hospital payment systems? Why don't we reform? Before we figure out what the right structure is to guarantee health care access for the public, and it feels as if. Because we can't do the one, we're almost stuck just trying to, let's limit the damage to the average American, but we are only handing more money to a couple of big industries.
You're so right. I mean, I'll push back a little bit on some of the things you said, but broadly speaking, you're exactly right. And, I think like you, when Republicans were saying during the shutdown debate about, giving, tens of billions of dollars in these premium tax credits to people so that they could buy, so that their premiums in the Affordable Care Act exchanges don't double. Republicans are, well, that's just throwing good money after bad. And I don't disagree with that. However, if you don't do it, those premiums are going to double.
No, right. Like it feels like we're all being held hostage here by the insurance companies.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. So here's where I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
It's not, the Affordable Care Act did more to control healthcare spending than your rap a second ago would have you think. Now,
Hmm.
if it solved the problem, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Far from solve the problem. But it did institute a number of things that led, especially Medicare costs, to grow considerably more slowly, which actually has helped us in the fiscal front. Some of those things, and almost all of those, had to do with controlling costs.
Hmm.
The problem is that there are, relative to all these other economies that spend half of what we do on healthcare as a share of the economy, we have very few cost controls. The ones that we do have actually work, giving Medicare the ability to negotiate for lower drug prices. That's worked, but there's 15 drugs on that formulary, and you need to
Yeah.
have hundreds.
Right.
Uh, uh, restricting the profitability of insurance companies if they're not using enough of their
Hmm.
profits to pay out. That was a cap that was put in on Obamacare. That's been helpful as well. So that's the way forward, and it means a huge political fight, but that's the fight we have to have.
So I get the fight part and all this, but let's say you get a fresh administration and a fresh Congress. Um, what's the simplest thing we could do first as a federal
Sure.
government to chip away at this?
Yeah. So the simplest thing is Medicare for more. If you were talking to Bernie Sanders, it would be Medicare for all.
Yeah,
But you're talking to me, and so it's Medicare for more. And what that means is lowering the age of Medicare uh,
I've heard it
eligibility.
50. Would you
50,
go
yeah.
down to 50 has been the number I've always seen
Yeah,
of
and
maybe.
so
Yeah.
because you might hear people talk about a public option. That's really very similar to what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And this is the idea that whether you're in your workplace looking at what you can choose, or you're
Hmm.
going into the Obamacare exchanges, you can, if you're of a certain age, you can choose Medicare, which is a less expensive form of care because of the kinds of cost controls I mentioned earlier. And as someone who's on it now, it works well.
It's really great when you get a sponsor that you already use. And guess what? Quince is something that in the Todd household we already go to. Why do we go to Quince? Because it's a place you go where you can get some really nice clothes without the really expensive prices. And one of the things I've been going through is I've transitioned from being Mr. Coat and Tie guy to wanting a little more casual, but to look nice doing it, is I've become Mr. Quarter Zip guy. Well, guess what? Guess who's got amazing amounts of quarter zips? It is Quince. I have gotten quite a few already from there. The stuff's really nice. I mean, look, they have Mongolian cashmere sweaters for $50. I just know, hey, cashmere, that's pretty good. You don't normally get that for $50 or less. Italian wool coats that look and feel like designer. The stuff, I'll be honest, right? You look at it online, you think, okay, is this really as nice as it looks? Well, when I got it, I was like, oh, this is real quality. So, yeah, I'm going to end up making sure I take it to my dry cleaner so I don't screw it up when I clean it. But I've been quite impressed. And hey, it's holiday season. It is impossible to shop for us middle-aged men. I know this. Well, tell your kids, tell your spouses, tell your partners, try Quince. Or if you're trying to figure out what to get, your adult child, what to get your mom or dad, I'm telling you, you're going to find something that is going to be comfortable for them on Quince. So get your wardrobe sorted and your gift list handled with Quince. Don't wait. Go to quince.com/Chuck for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada as well. That's QUINCE.com/Chuck. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Chuck. Use that code. Let me ask this. Why, it's interesting. Did did you expect when the Affordable Care Act happened and the idea was there was a hope that you'd have more insurance companies come into the marketplace? Um, did you think we would have the big, the progressives, USAA, Geico? I don't think they really did get into the marketplace. Did you assume more would have jumped into this?
I did. Um, and I do think that competition has been somewhat insufficient in that space. Um,
Every
as
day
you,
isn't United Healthcare buying up another
yeah,
company?
exactly. There's vertical integration, there's
Yeah,
horizontal, vertical meaning up and down through the hospital systems, and then there's
right.
horizontal. Yeah. So there's that kind of integration, particularly in some of our larger cities, is putting upward pressure on costs. And in the piece that Neil Mahoney and I just wrote, we went after that. We said we have to block that. You have a lot of investors
Hmm.
supporting that kind of integration. But on the insurance point, remember when we did the ACA, we made a political, because I was in the Obama administration then,
Right.
we made a political calculation that we were going to go, through the insurance companies, not around them. We were going to adapt them as allies
No, I
to.
mean that was the mistake the Clintons made, right? Which was trying to go after the insurance companies. And Thelma and Louise, wasn't Thelma and Louise, Harry and Louise. Sorry, Thelma and Louise was the
Yeah,
movie. Harry and Louise became the faces of the opposition, And then I mean, I understood You're right. You guys made a political to, hey, we're going to have Harry and Louise on our side, which they, if I remember, they actually re-upped the ad and were.
correct. Well, we never would have legislated that if we had, I think, if we had gone with the trying to crowd them out. And I think that's why Medicare for more is going to be a tough sell, because they recognize that that kind of competition, they don't want to compete with the government. They recognize that Medicare can provide less expensive health care for people, and they kind of are resigned to assigning that to seniors. But if you take that down to 50, they're going to fight you tooth and nail for those mansion reasons I said before. But we still have to go there.
Well, it seems, especially if we're living longer, um, I mean, it just, I guess that's got to be the fear. I mean, that would be the argument against bringing the age down. Medicare is only going to get more stressed because people are going to be living longer and on Medicare longer.
Well, not necessarily, because we're not getting into the policy weeds. So it's not that this is going to be free for people. I mean, Medicare's not free for
Hmm.
anybody now. You're still, you have Part B premiums and all that. No, they would have to pay an actuarially fair premium rate
Hmm.
if you're on Medicare. It's not free. It's not like Medicaid, which is, kind of free healthcare.
Right.
But that premium is going to be considerably lower than what you're paying to the private sector.
Yeah. Um, Future of work, not just AI, but the length of the work week.
Hmm.
We've there's been chatter about this for multiple generations, right? And what the work week's going to be. You're starting to see, I think Bernie Sanders is advocating a 32-hour work week. But it really all goes back to what's full time, and because what the definition of full time is, then of course triggers whether you get benefits or not. And so that's why this is,
Hmm.
I think, an important issue. Um, where are you on that issue? And is that something that you think is coming?
Well, first of all, the way Senator Sanders talks about it is he wants people to work 8 hours less per week, but not take a cut in pay.
Hmm.
And that strikes me as, unrealistic. I
Hmm.
don't see how that works. Um, I think that leads to lots of unintended consequences that would be detrimental to
Hmm.
workers. If you wanted to have for the option of a 4 hour week, a 4 day week, and people could still be considered working full time and get those same sorts of benefits, that's a conversation worth having. But output would go down, and so we'd have less growth, presumably, and that's kind of a trade-off. It's interesting because for economists, a lot of time social welfare, well-being is too easily analogized to GDP. But if I told you we can have less GDP, but we can work less hard, you might say Europe. Um,
Right.
and
That is what somebody would say. Europe, look at them.
yeah,
And
they might say
guess
Europe.
what? And we drove right past them in our GDP over the
We drove right
over
past
the
them in their
decade.
GDP, but when it comes to, if you actually look at measures of happiness, they
Yeah.
actually kick our butts in a lot of ways, especially around this issue of work. So the problem I have with the conversation is when it sounds like there's no trade-off. If you accept that there's a growth trade-off, but maybe you improve social welfare,
Hmm.
fine. I'd be willing to, entertain that idea. It's not something I think about a lot, though, these days, and it's not even really on my list of policy ideas. Why? Because affordability is such a huge issue right now, and I think it's been for a while, and it's going to be going
Hmm.
forward. And if you're working one day less, you're going to make less, and life is going to be, presumably even less affordable. So I think that that's a real challenge right now.
No, in fact, I think I think the near term future of work, certainly for my kids, is I assume, and frankly, I look at the situation I've put together for myself. It's probably similar to what you've put together. Is you don't have one job, you have four or five jobs, and there's going to be a larger and larger segment of the population that is going to have multiple income streams. Um, how does federal policy have to change to support an economy that's going to have essentially more people in I don't like to use gig work because I think people immediately assume, oh, Uber driver. I don't think that's going to,
Yeah.
it could be just all sorts of things, could be part of the service economy, professional economy, et cetera.
Yeah. I think in two major ways. One we've actually talked about, which is healthcare. Of course, most working age people get their healthcare not just for them, but for their family through their employer. So if we move to a situation where you're not as connected to one employer,
Hmm.
such that you have employer-sponsored insurance, we're going to need a system like Medicare for More.
Hmm.
The Obamacare exchanges, by the way, were invented to help solve that problem. But they're kind of kludgy and they're kind of expensive, and you and I already talked about that. So we have to make sure that we have a very uniquely weird and kind of dumb system in this country where we have most working age people getting their health care through work. That's a huge burden on companies that would rather make cars and not provide health insurance. So breaking that asunder, it has historical roots that we can get into after World War II when there were wage freezes in place. You had to figure out a way to give people more benefits. But that would be a great place to start. And secondly, labor standards, the umbrella of labor standards, wage protections, unemployment insurance, overtime pay, that's all connected to traditional work at traditional schedules. So you'd want that umbrella to be reshaped to protect people who didn't necessarily have traditional work arrangements.
Well, you're right. I remember that was one of the one of the arguments that the Obama administration was using to sell the Affordable Care Act. That, hey, portability, you don't
Yeah,
have to, you can work part time at a company without worrying that you don't feel like you can leave, that sort of thing. You're not stuck in a
right,
job
right.
um,
Job loss.
be,
Yeah.
because of healthcare. At the same time, I do worry about companies offering a lot of contract work, which is code for I ain't giving you any benefits.
Absolutely. And, that's another reason why healthcare reform is so vital. And
Mhm.
again, a lot of those folks are getting healthcare on the exchanges right now. And, it's better than not being covered, but they don't love it.
Let me ask you about two Trump policies, and what you make of them, and if you were part of the next administration, um, would you try to scrap it or enhance it? One is no tax on tips. I was amused the other day by an article that IRS agents have to figure out, is this pornography
I
or
saw
not
that.
pornography? I mean, I just sort of like, oh, wow. Well, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of 16-year-old boys might volunteer to work at the IRS or intern. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a bad idea. Do you want to say the second one again,
No, no.
or
Well,
one at a time?
the second one is these new essentially baby bonds. They're
Oh
calling
yeah,
them Trump accounts.
yeah,
But the Michael Dell, that who just actually added to sort of expand the pool. I want to get into that in a minute, but let's start with no tax on tips, because
yeah.
my joke has been I'd like to be paid all in tips now, please.
Exactly. So the first thing we worried about, literally 30 seconds after somebody told me about that, I said, you're going to have a lot of, stockbrokers who are saying, I earn $1 a year and the rest is tips. Now, they did try to structure the
Hmm.
policy to block that.
Right.
And that just adds a level of complexity that is really the antithesis of smart tax policy. The minute you have 80 occupations that are okay and a bunch that aren't, you can imagine what's going to go on in tax court.
Hmm.
And,
Well, it's a good
people,
thing you're getting rid of IRS agents because
yeah, right.
they'll be able to.
So the first problem is that it's easy to game, and I suspect that their guardrails are insufficient. The
Hmm.
second problem is that there are a lot of low-wage workers who get tips and don't pay any federal income tax. So this
Hmm.
doesn't help them at all. Most low-wage workers simply don't have a federal tax liability, so it means nothing to them. And then, the third problem is, we actually have a very significant revenue problem in this country, and so tax cuts are
Hmm.
one reason why we are looking at a really unsustainable fiscal path. So I think it's complex, I think it's poorly targeted, and I think it's a waste.
But boy,
Otherwise,
is
I
it.
like it.
I was just going to say the problem you have is it sort of strikes me as what you said, like, look, well, we had to work through the insurance companies, even though we didn't want to. Um, this feels like a policy that nobody's going to be wanting to be the member of Congress that says, no, 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 let's bring taxing, let's put tips back into income, taxable income.
Yeah, you're probably right. And so, the minute you open it's so much easier to grant a tax cut than to take it back, obviously. I mean, I
Mhm.
think if we start seeing a lot of fraud,
Yeah.
which I predict we will, at least we might be in a market where we can put up more guardrails.
Let's talk about the Trump baby bonds, or the birth. And I guess this is their way of trying to encourage um, more families. Let's be, which, and you guys were fighting for the child care tax credit.
Yeah.
I sort of believe that, frankly, I think you guys should have died on that hill, and I don't know why you didn't politically, but
In
I'm
terms of what do you mean, like fight?
never have given it up on it. I mean, I
Yeah,
think that was something worth losing an election, taking it to the ballot box. I just, and never giving up on it. Well,
fair point.
I understand why, you thought, well, we have a bigger deal to make here, and it's possible to do this. And you certainly look, that's the old legislator in Joe Biden. I get it. But the child care tax credit, it mattered to people. It has bipartisan interest. Like, it just felt like
I
it
hear
felt like
you.
it felt like a policy hill worth dying on, because there's going to be something for this, right? Right now it's baby bonds. I don't think this quite cuts it. Although I can imagine now people will say, hey, you can use that money for childcare.
Well, you can't use it, so you can't use it for 18
Not
years.
yet,
So
but it's coming.
well,
That
you
would be
can't.
my
Yeah, maybe. But so on your child care tax credit point, we didn't have the votes on the Democratic caucus. Manchin was against it. So, and I think Sinema was too. So, we didn't have the votes. But I take your point. It was a real. I think that many of us were a little surprised by how little the public seem to fight for it. A lot of times when I get what I said a minute ago, when you provide people with
Yeah.
a benefit like that, a lot of times taking it away is
But
bad politics.
let me posit a theory on that.
Sure.
At, the child care tax credit came just when the government was shoveling out other money too.
Yeah, so people
I
did.
and I don't know if they fully appreciated
It
what they were
probably
getting.
became viewed as like another pandemic era thing. So
A
you're right.
COVID thing. Yeah.
So look, I think giving $1,000 of seed money for what really is like an IRA account
Hmm.
is a fine thing to do. I think the problem is that it's not at all targeted and that it will exacerbate intergenerational inequality. You're allowed to contribute, your family members are allowed to contribute $5,000 a year tax-free to these funds. I think it's tax-free. Obviously, the seed money you don't pay taxes on until you take it out.
Hmm.
You can't touch it for 18 years. And so who's going to be able to make those contributions? Not low
That's right.
income people, high
Right.
income people. So
Right.
it's going to exacerbate inequality over the long run. And I think that's problematic. I would have targeted it in a different way so that instead of giving money to savers who are going to save anyway, which, my kids are, your kids probably are,
Right.
target it to families that don't have the resources to make that saving and add to it over time so that it can build.
There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/ToddCast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win.
Well, it's interesting to me what the Dells did. They concentrated the donation by zip code.
Yeah, so that is a much more targeted approach, and I think a better one. I don't know that we can count on philanthropy to get us where we need to go on this, but
and I'm curious to that. And I find this to be really I'm really uncomfortable with the idea of government spending becoming a charitable gift, and I don't know how else to put it. I can't sit here and say, well, geez, it's bad what the Dells are doing. Or it was bad what who was it? Was it who threw him money to pay the military or to help contribute to military pay?
Name. Yeah,
I think it was one of the Mellons. One of the Mellons did that. And you're like, well, I appreciate your patriotism, right? Like I think that's great.
Yep.
But is that a habit the government should get into? That maybe they need a chair, they need a foundation to raise money for?
So, this is why we have a progressive income tax. So you can say, boy, cross my fingers, I hope there's some really generous patriots out there who will provide us help where we need it, like fund the military. Or you can say, we're going to progressively tax people. If this economy delivered you billions, hundreds of billions, trillions, we're going to definitely take some of that back, and we're going to use it for things that the electorate decides are, the electorate decides through their elected officials is what we want to spend money on. And, that's how democracy works. So I don't like the idea of leaving it to the kindness of stranger trillionaires to make up the difference. I think that's why we have taxes.
Is it your understanding that Dells are going to get is this tax-free? Their charitable donation? Is this
charitable deduction? Yeah.
So this will be
it's a deduction that you deduct it at your top
right.
tax
So
rate.
how much? So that means you and I are subsidizing this charitable giving already.
Correct. That's a great point. I don't. Yeah, it's a lot of savings there for them. And look, a lot of people have come after the charitable deduction as a way to raise more revenue, and it never really seems to get anywhere. Maybe for good reason. It's a lot of, but
I thought Obama lowered it. Didn't he lower the rate from down to? I thought he lowered how much.
I definitely remember trying to do so, but
and it never happened.
I didn't think we got there, but I could be misremembering.
Yeah, for some reason I thought it went down from 20 went to 20 28 instead of 35.
Whenever we used to have revenue meetings, which we had all the time because we were desperately needing more, somebody would say, "Can we move that?" And the next meeting higher up would come the answer, "No, we can't."
No, you can't. That's funny. Let me get you out of here on the childcare tax credit. What would it take to make it permanent, and how would you pay for it?
It's not cheap.
No, it's not.
I think if you're talking 10 years, you're in the 700-800 billion range. I know these numbers when I'm working on that stuff, but
fair enough. Yeah, we're not gonna hold you to
I think that's the range. And when we did it, it was deficit financed. And I don't know if you've seen any of my work on this, but I am pretty much a lifetime fiscal dove who's lately become a bit hawkish.
Do you feel like you're like, okay, now everybody has said, my entire adult life has, the sky's been falling when it comes to the debt.
Right.
The sky's been falling, and it's people I trust, not just ideologues, right? The sky's been falling, and somehow it turns out the Paul Krugmans of the world, and the fiscal doves like yourself. Well, no, our debt to GDP ratio can be higher, and we can do this, and we can do that. But you think we might be at the breaking point?
I don't think we're at the breaking point, but I think we're at a level of unsustainability that is dangerously tempting a breaking point. And it's not even clear what a breaking point is. We have a sovereign currency that we print, so it's not like we're going to have a Liz Truss moment because our debt markets are so large and so liquid, and we have the dominant global currency and all that in the dollar. But the reason I flipped, and I've written extensively about this, including a New York Times op-ed that had a graphic in it that kind of explains this, is because interest rates are higher now. And I think the thing that people missed all those years where they had their hair on fire is they just didn't recognize, and it's kind of right in front of you, how the real interest rate was so low, even negative in some cases, that we could handily service our debt without breaking a sweat. But now the interest rate is higher, and my priors are that it's going to stay up. You don't know. That's an impossible variable to forecast. But this is, again, a hope for the best, plan for the worst moment. So I wouldn't support a full-out 10-year expenditure, $600-700 billion for an extended child tax credit without a pay-for. But those pay-fors are readily available if you're willing to raise taxes, especially at the higher end. And in fact, in our budgets, we did that. So you can actually go back and read how we financed a permanent extension of the child care tax credit. It may not have been quite as generous as what we had in the pandemic recession, but it was plenty generous.
Is there any worry as an economist that in some ways in the same way that the insurance companies, because they know a government subsidy is coming, they kind of frankly mess with the prices so they're able to, make sure they get some profit, and they know people are going to have a certain amount of money. Do you worry that happens that basically child care becomes an industry, if you will?
Not so much with child care. I just think that I'll get slightly technical for a second. Child care has a very high supply elasticity, meaning that if people want it and they have the resources to get it, you start seeing childcare centers pop up. So the responsiveness of childcare production to demand is quite strong. So that flexible elasticity there is helpful, such that if we were able to provide people the subsidies they've needed, and when we have in the past, we've seen this, I don't think you see, particularly even medium-term pressures on costs.
Do you end up, I'm going to get you out of here, but do you end up imagining that instead of a child care tax credit, it becomes what I would call a home care tax credit, because maybe you're taking care of an elderly parent?
Well, that's certainly something Biden was interested in. I tend to like the idea of not even a child care tax credit, but a child tax credit. If you're raising kids, your life is, you've done this, I've done this.
Yeah.
If you're raising kids, even if you've got a decent income, your life is a lot more expensive.
100%.
Childcare can cost, $2,500 a month easily in an area like this.
So you'd be in favor of a tax code that essentially played favorites for parents with kids at home?
Yeah, and some of those parents probably are in a sandwich generation, and if they want to use it for childcare or elder care, they could. But, I think a generous child tax credit, that was targeted, by the way, which also helps keep the price down. I don't think we need to give it to, millionaires and billionaires.
Jared, I'm going to let you go. Where can people find your work? I know you got a Substack. Tell them where. You're also, I think you're involved in a couple of things. So pitch away.
Yeah, so I write basically in 3 different places. Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, CEPR. You can see my work up there. The Center for American Progress. We recently put a housing report on housing affordability. You can find that up there. It's called Build, Baby, Build. But then almost, every couple days, I write something on my Substack, which is called Jared Substack. And it's easy to find. So that's where you can read my stuff.
Excellent. It's great to catch up. I miss, we joked, we used to occasionally be in the same pickup basketball game, but
I think that's behind both of us, my friend.
Yeah. Father time has scared us away on that and, fear of middle-aged injuries at this point. Good to catch up, Jared.
Great
Appreciate it.
Take care.